morning, ladies and gentlemen, partners, colleagues, and friends. It's a great pleasure to have you here and to welcome you in Track 4 event in the MENA Climate Week. My name is Mariam, and I'm the Sharm Adaptation Agenda lead of the Climate Champions team, where our mandate is to work on bridging action between state and non-state actors. We'll come to that later when we have our high-level speaker. But welcoming you all to our session. And our session is about managing cascading risks. It's titled Integrating Extreme Heat Resilience Responses into Just Transition Planning, particularly in the MENA region. This is a very timely topic. It's an evolving track. This year is a milestone year. It's the first global stocktake under the UNFCCC where the multilateral system in its totality, including state and non-state actors, are assessing where we are on our climate change goals, on adaptation, mitigation, finance, capacity, and technology. Adaptation is one core pillar. There's a long history of adaptation, of being a bit fragmented, maybe sometimes an afterthought, but there's so many, there's so much momentum now, and there are actions that are being taken by multiple partners. And here we're trying to connect the dots. We're trying to see what solutions are working, what solutions are particularly working in specific regions, what are the opportunities of connecting and scaling those actions up. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you briefly to our flow of the session today. And we have an extremely interesting lineup of speakers. It's also a very loaded, if I may say, event with excellent perspectives to anticipate. So we'll be starting with high-level remarks and then proceed to our guest speaker, which we're very pleased to have with us here. And then we'll move to the first panel. It's particularly tackling narrative, policies, programs, and resources, particularly from the UN and specialized organizations. And next, we'll move to a solutions panel with insights from work of partners, businesses, and financiers on extreme heat resilience and long-term adaptation. Then we'll move to a Q&A session. So from now, I'd like to invite you all to save some interesting questions to our panelists. Either they will be in the room or seated on the panel. You can still direct any statements or questions as you wish. And without further ado, I would like to open with high-level opening remarks from Jen Austin. Jen is our Director of Strategy Policy in the Climate Champions team. Jen, pleased to have you.
Thank you so much. There we go. This one's on. All right. Thank you so much, Mariam. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our kind hosts of MENA Regional Climate Week. It's really been nice to have a few days of discussion, really digging in on so many important issues and how they impact this region in particular. Today, as Mariam said, we're going to dive in on the topic of extreme heat resilience with a focus on how we need to be thinking about planning for that changing world and making sure we're doing that in a just and inclusive way. I want to quickly introduce the mandate of the high-level champions. And so Mariam and I both work for the Climate Champions team, and we support the high-level champions for climate action. And that is a position that was created out of the UN space, responsible for bringing what they call non-state actors or the real economy into the process. And so much of the formal UN process is inter-country negotiations. And yet since the signing of the Paris Agreement, the parties realized that in order to actually move to solutions, we need a whole-of-society approach, and so they created the position of climate champion to work with those real economy actors, with businesses, investors, cities, states, regions, civil society, health clinics, academics, sort of the whole range of people who are out there in the world trying to get things done, both with the task of bringing that group together and mobilizing and aligning that work to be even bigger, better, stronger, and to think about how that can come and support governments and the collective of governments to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. Really excited to have the panels, as Mariam said, some power-packed panels with real examples of people of how they're tackling these things on the ground and thinking about what are the policy frameworks and approaches needed to make sure that progress moves fast enough. We know that here well, it's a timely time to speak about these things, not only for the global stocktake, but a lot of discussions ongoing about what are the global goals on adaptation, what do they need to be, and how is it that we can work together to get from where we are, which we know is off course, to where we need to be really in this decade, with some really decisive years ahead of us. And so we know that in this region, all regions face challenges, and there's some serious challenges here, especially with respect to different types of infrastructure. There's energy security and social welfare, both of which depend on infrastructure systems, and the fact that there are significantly higher temperatures here. Temperatures are rising everywhere, and then even faster than average in this region. That leads to more drought. Then when rains do come, intense flooding, and putting real strain on those systems. And so what we need to do is make sure that as we're thinking about transitioning to a net zero future, that we're also developing in a resilient way. And essentially, when we think about the risks and people talk about the sort of business case for investment in resilience, first of all, some of the stats are quite stark, and many of you know them because we're here in the region and people are experiencing them. But MENA is home to 12 out of the world's 17 most water-stressed countries. It is a very water-scarce region, and that's only going to become more and more of an issue. The World Bank has estimated that water scarcity could cost Middle East nations between 6 to 14% of GDP by 2050. And that impacts agriculture, it impacts human health, it impacts water availability, that impacts economies or incomes, which are all real economic investments and real economic costs, and yet somehow we often hear people saying that there's not a business case for an investment in resilience, or people don't quite see it, and we do see a very real challenge that there's not enough money flowing to resilience. And I think really what that means is that people aren't paying enough attention to those risks, to the cost of inaction, and not actually recognizing so many ways in which our current economies and societies are dependent upon the resilience and the natural resources around us, and extreme heat is going to continue to be a real challenge there. We know that public and private sectors are starting to take significant steps around decarbonization and greening economies and infrastructure, and what we need to make sure is that we're looking at building for a future that will be somewhat different than now. And no smart business person would make an investment without understanding the context in which they're investing. And yet, because change is happening so rapidly, there's a risk of that happening now if we're not very serious and specific and specific about how we look at what those changes are that are coming and how the conditions are going to be different, especially with respect to heat, water scarcity, and some of those things. We call it resilience in the climate world, but really it means planning. It means knowing what that world is going to look like and thinking about what the risks are going to be and making sure that we're investing in those ways. We know we need to take a really integrated and holistic and inclusive approach. And our panelists here are going to provide some examples and insights into why and how they're doing that, and looking at some of the challenges and solutions, and why it's so important to make sure that we're bringing in a diversity of views to help make sure we don't have blind spots. Those examples are going to range from how extreme heat impacts the energy system, electricity system, some of the hard infrastructure systems we've seen, also at a community level, how climate-induced heat and impact livelihoods, displacement. We're talking everything from farming to construction jobs, outdoor jobs, and how that stress can cause displacement, which then puts increased stress on other locations to where people are moving. At an individual level, there's very real health impacts that impact everybody, especially women and children, and thinking about how that impacts then societal productivity, incomes, and ultimately national and regional GDP. There's impacts on water and food availability, supply systems that impact jobs and people. So, as we said, we're working with partners across the region and across the world as we look to tackle this and bring this issue to the fore at the COP. We sort of organize ourselves through two main campaigns. One is called the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which Mariam will speak to in more detail briefly, but is really a set of solutions, near-term solutions. When you talk about resilience in the future and what is it that we need to think about, it breaks it down into some specific systems: food, water, nature, oceans, infrastructure, human settlements, and really looks at what do we need in this decade, in the next 7 years, what are the solutions we need to get to, and how can different people come together to work on those solutions. We also have what we call the Race to Resilience, which is an umbrella campaign of partners working around the world with with those businesses, large and small, with investors, with cities and states, coming together. Each of those individual entities has something they can contribute, and so through the partner initiatives of the Race to Resilience, they can make those commitments, set forward plans, and then start to work together to achieve them. We think about like what does this mean? We throw around words of making sure that we're sort of being inclusive and holistic and taking an all of society approach, all of which is very important, and I think at its core comes down to doing this alone is hard. It's very complex, and there's a lot of people that we need to bring into the equation. But together, when we start to synchronize our efforts, we can start to make progress. And when you think about who it is that's investing, or who's buying a product, or who's selling a product, or who can help you think about how to manage these risks, you start to reduce the uncertainty, and you start to have a shared sense of direction, and that with that confidence, we can move forward together. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to bring together here in these panels, what we're trying to hear about, I think the lessons learned throughout. And so it is my pleasure to welcome you all to that. Look forward to hearing the examples that we hear today, look forward to the conversations that this can spark here, and then really look forward to hopefully welcoming many of you to COP28, where we'll see even further progress on the stage there in just a few short months.
Thank you very much, Jen, for these excellent opening remarks, really into the mandate of the champions, the global policy context, but also the real economy and the real impacts that we're seeking to address with a diversity of partners. And as you have rightly mentioned, Jen, we're operating, yes, in a policy context. The global goal and adaptation is being defined, and through our work, we're seeking to inspire some examples of concrete solutions that can be implemented across different systems. So moving away from these sectoral approaches, and there has been a very interesting session that was happening right before here, and all of the speakers, and the one particularly from UNEP, he clearly referred to the IPCC findings that say adaptation is fragmented, uneven, sector-specific, advancing maybe more on planning, but not as much as implementation, and there's a huge financing gap, and the financing gap is really widening because of the increasing costs. But at the same time, they highlighted as well that there is a need to also make the case for a business opportunity for adaptation. It's really out of crises and risks that we are pushed towards the potential of systems transformation. And we're also lucky to have one of our speakers in the upcoming panel who will introduce a really integrated adaptation and long-term resilience, but also low greenhouse gas emission business case in agriculture that is sustainable, ethical, and also have the communities at heart. So without further introductions, I'll get a chance to briefly introduce the Sharm Adaptation Agenda. I would like to invite a guest speaker that we're very pleased to have with us at a last minute. I'm pleased to introduce Princess Mashal Al-Sha'lan, who is the co-founder of ENG Collective. Mashal will really give us some inspiration on what are the examples of culturally informed sustainable development. So insights from the region also will give us a sneak peek or a teaser on a report that they're working on integrated responses in the region. Mashal, you're free to do it from the podium or using a mic. Okay, great.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Saudi Arabia on behalf of a Saudi and a very welcoming nation. So if you allow me to take a few minutes to just orient you around why it was really important for us to host MENA Climate Week in the Kingdom, and why the Kingdom is really serious about tackling a lot of these issues, not solely for being a responsible player within the global arena, but for the multitude of challenges that we might face in the not too long future. We all will be talking, I assume, about these global challenges of managing a common, where sometimes we hear the refrain of common but differentiated responsibilities, but then the climate or the atmosphere is agnostic to who was responsible for what. The impacts and the implications on the local front tend to be sometimes, and in most times, those that are impacted are those that have done very little to add to that damage. On the flip side of the equation, we also know that there are direct impacts that might be differentiated, but also different sets of endowments that will allow different countries to tackle issues in a differentiated manner. And my main issue, maybe today, if you allow me, is to have a safe space of having these types of conversations. The question there is, how do we ensure transparent and just pathways that are inclusive, that are scalable, that are measurable and that do not go back to these differentiated perspectives. It's not an us versus them type of mentality that we need to be harnessing within this space. Maybe the type of dialogues that happen within negotiations almost pit you into that type of framing. But where we need to be heading at is a recognition that for the action to actually happen and to be felt, we need to be sure that there are some spaces for these commonalities. So why is it really important for the kingdom? Very simple example. We had a brilliant talk yesterday that we were invited to participate in, that the King Khalid Foundation has put together around the role of Arab philanthropies in this climate journey. And I've heard our colleague, Her Excellency, the climate envoy and champion, speak on behalf of keeping 1.5 alive. The issue that I have there is that 1.5 is great for a global average, but our region will definitely witness, in some assumptions, a 2.2 degree increase. So the 1.5, we're already overshooting the 2-degree Paris goal for our region. Saudi Arabia has a huge set of very unique challenges that I don't want to maybe tease too much, because we have a report that will be upcoming, and it's not fair for me to say the findings of some of the brilliant scientists that have worked tirelessly on coming up with this report. But in short, and I see my colleague Natalia here, who will be speaking about extreme heat. Extreme heat is intensifying. We have massive congregations of populations that add to that risk, one of which is Hajj. So we have to keep that in mind. And I think Nuhad as well, who will be talking maybe about the specific implications on the Muslim population. Sea level rise is rife with uncertainty, because whether we like it or not, the current models that we have are global by nature. I was joking with one of our colleagues at the IPCC saying you must have forgotten our Red Sea and our Gulf in those considerations of those models, which means that we need to have homegrown science to allow us to have a bit more granularity around that adaptation measure. What will happen along the coast of the Red Sea is yet to be fully granular and requires an extra level of consideration. Not only on the coastal flooding piece of the equation, but also potential saltwater intrusions into aquifers and other maybe unknown implications of those on that front. The Red Sea is always paraded as a beautiful part of the world and maybe a hope for the rest of the oceans because of its resilience, allegedly, to heat. I'm unfortunately here to speak about the bleaching events that we're already witnessing on our coast this year. With El Nino, we're not disconnected from the rest of the world. And in spite of it being resilient to its own baseline, which was relatively high, well, guess what? That high is becoming even higher with climate change. And last and most importantly, around the issue of the human element, the education. I think what's really important for us within the GCC, and we're quite lucky, but also maybe in some ways that luck has allowed us to have some sort of a blind eye around some of the impacts that we've witnessed to date. We've had massive economic development that have happened in a short amount of time, but I always joke, if our bus stops are air-conditioned, how am I to feel or to sense a 1 or 2 degree increase? There's also that issue of a shifting baseline syndrome. So what I recall is different from what my mother recalls. What I recall from my childhood, I could tend to dismay or to say that that was not true. So we have to keep all of those elements in sight. And when I say culturally informed, it's not because we come from an alien culture that's different to the needs of the rest of the world. It's because that we have our stories that we need to keep in mind when we're taking some of these considerations. And why do stories matter in our region? Because the baseline of data that we have is not enough. If you want to take a bit more of a backward-looking type of approach. So yes, all of the above in terms of focus, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, none of which needs to supersede the other. We've done that mistake in the past where we said adaptation is not allowing us to focus on mitigation. Mitigation is the most important element. Every single one of those are extremely important, and they require the right amount of focus, front and center. And maybe I'll wrap up with this notion of collaboration and a pathway forward for this coalition building. If I'm really honest with the lead up, let's say, to this COP, and without becoming too political, we've been seeing a huge crisis of trust emerge within the scene. Be it a crisis of trust of the sentiments that countries and the sincerity of the action that countries are bringing to the table, or be it in terms of a crisis of trust between governments and their populations. That kind of space will become more and more fraught as we start to face some of these impacts and implications of climate change, and in my opinion requires the utmost amount of focus. Unfortunately, if we do not have trust within a system, we will not have, albeit imperfect actions, but at least the right type of collaboration that we're hoping to see in the next few years. And hopefully that will safeguard us from all of these implications. So at the last, if you allow me, I'll touch on the upcoming report, and I invite everyone to join us if you're available, and if not, it will be available online. And we'll be releasing a report that's mainly been the work of our brilliant friends at the Climate and Livability Initiative at KAUST University, and in collaboration with CAPSARC, that's titled Climate Futures, the Impacts of a 3-Degree World on Saudi Arabia. And through it, you'll get a sense of how that impacts every single facet of the system, be it natural, human, or also systems, our energy systems as well. So with that, I welcome you to a very fruitful dialogue, I hope, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes on this podium.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Princess Michelle, for these insights on your work from Saudi Arabia. It's really inspiring. I would now like to briefly introduce you to the main agenda through which we engage, which is the Sharm Adaptation Agenda. So I've previously introducing myself. I am the Sharm Adaptation Agenda lead, so I really coordinate the implementation of this agenda through a large network of partners that we have with the UNFCCC Climate Champions team. And these partners, as Jen has earlier mentioned, include everyone, so multi-level actors, businesses, cities, financiers, NGOs, the whole wide multilateral systems, and also local governments. So the thinking around the Sharm Adaptation Agenda is that we really recognize that what we're missing is what short-term solutions that we need to make, like Jen has mentioned, this decade. So in concrete terms, what does enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability mean if we want to translate them in terms of specific solutions? That was one. The other element that we recognize is that there is fragmentation, and in order to address adaptation, we need more of a systemic manner, one which recognizes the interconnectedness, like Michelle has mentioned, between human natural systems and the infrastructures that they are dependent on for the livelihoods and economies. So we started laying out what is called now the Sharm Adaptation Agenda. So the vision that we have is to build an adaptive and resilient world, particularly for the most vulnerable 4 billion population. So it's a global agenda, but we recognize that on the very short or medium term, we really need to award or concert our efforts in terms of actions being implemented, in terms of partnerships, but also resources that we mobilize to fill in the existing gaps to be able to support those vulnerable populations around the world. And this is really embedded in the findings of the IPCC, which indicated around 3.6 billion people live in vulnerability hotspots. They include water scarcity, food insecurity, and other impacts, among others. So the Sharm Adaptation Agenda is organized around food and agriculture systems, human settlements, coastal and ocean systems, and infrastructures, with water and natural systems as a cross-cutting element, really, because we realize that at least 40% of solutions that we have nature and water elements embedded in them. And we recognize the role of enablers, so planning and policy, national planning and policy, or planning and policy that are being done by a multiplicity of partners, like Jen has also mentioned, many businesses, banks and others. Do they have their own risk forecasting on the medium and long term? So we work with all types of actors as well on integrating adaptation in their short, medium and long term planning. And of course, finance. So finance really from multiple sources. So we work with banks, insurers, actors in the private sector, multilateral development banks, but also to push towards the increase of public financing as part of our Sharm Adaptation Agenda, which is also in line with the global policy landscape around financing. the way that we implement the Sharm Adaptation Agenda is that we seek to convene and connect actors, so we really connect the dots. We try to build a narrative on adaptation for those who are not really traditionally involved. So we know from different partners, there have been some actors in the private sector who say, what does it mean concretely to have adaptation actions in my portfolio? We're working with different actors to translate that, how you can include risk planning across the value chains, supply chains, etc. We also work on leveraging financing from multiple actors, including insurers, banks, among others. So our function is really to convene and connect. We also have done some efforts because we realized that we're, yes, progressing more on the front of planning rather than an actual project pipeline. And this has been identified both in the state and non-state actor front. So our two climate champions from COP27, from COP26, COP27, but also right now spearheaded by Her Excellency Razan, our champion from COP28, have worked on what we call a project compendium, where they have really toured the different economic commissions and then asked state and non-state actors, give us some projects that we can bring to financial closure, and we can help you do the matchmaking to finance. So right now we have around 16 to 19% of our compendium as adaptation projects. So we also will be seeking to enhance this effort to make sure that we're bringing more projects to the implementation phase on the ground. So this is also part of our efforts. And finally, this year we will have our first report on progress in implementing the Sharm Adaptation Agenda, and it will really bring a unique perspective. The Sharm Adaptation Agenda was only launched at COP27, so it's a nascent agenda, and through which we really seek to inspire and bring in an implementation arm or an action arm to the global goal in adaptation once it is defined, one that seeks to mobilize actors other than countries who implement the national policies that they lay out, but we recognize that including different sectors are at the heart of a collective adaptation response. And finally, this year is the first global stocktake, so we're seeking to also contribute of a portfolio of success stories, case studies and solutions that can be replicated, that can be scaled up across regions, but also across actors, to identify what has worked through an expert narrative from those who have worked on the actual implementation on the ground, and what do we need to enhance as we enter this phase beyond the global stocktake, where we lay out what types of forward-looking actions, what type of ambition do we need to enhance against this round of the global stocktake to ensure that we're adequately responding to the current impacts and risks on people, economies, and the infrastructure and natural systems that they are dependent on. So this year, outcomes actually, or discussions in this meeting, will be captured as part of the report as insights from the MENA region, and we look forward to working with many of you. Some of the partners we have in the room, we have already engaged on in different projects, but we also want to use this opportunity to connect different actors together, but also to take this forward, working together in the next month or years, but also towards COP28 as an immediate term. Finally, before I hand over to Richard, I think many of you have been wondering, what does adaptation have to do with the just transition? And the just transition pathways was just a work program that has been launched at COP27 as part of the UN negotiating process. It's still being defined, but there's an emerging narrative. The just transition has always been a subject of only a net zero transition or a transition of energy systems, but there are calls or an emerging narrative from different organizations working on the ground with communities, with academia, but also countries are providing in their statements and submissions that there also needs to be a just transition to adaptation and resilience. A very simple example is a worker may need to transition from a business that was primarily fossil fuel based. He might have lost, or she might have lost, her livelihoods. In a similar case, someone whose neighborhood or his house or his company has been struck by a climate disaster, how do we also transition this person? How do we transition this economy to a resilient future? So this maybe could give a seed, but I know that Richard will dive deeper into details. And so I'm now very pleased to hop on to Richard's scene setting. And I'm pleased to introduce him. So my colleague Richard Klein. Richard is from Stockholm Environment Institute. And Richard, I have a couple of questions for you, but I know you will do your magic right now. We really want to understand more on the evolving narrative on the just transition. What is it that we're transitioning from? What is it that we want to transition to? And if there are any examples, maybe from businesses or from governments or from different sets of actors, a concrete example of how this transition could potentially look like, because it's also a multi-actor and a multi-level transition. I leave it to you now, and pleased to hear your intro. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Mariam and the high-level champions, for putting Just Transition for Adaptation on the agenda. I think it's a really important issue, and it just happens to be one that my team and I have been working on. So I'm hoping to present some of the insights that we've gained, and which I think are definitely relevant for this region as well. You mentioned the IPCC finding that adaptation is fragmented. There was another important IPCC finding that is that adaptation, or that climate risk, is increasingly complex, and that adaptation is therefore increasingly difficult. And part of that is the cascading nature of climate risk, which is part of the topic of this session. And I'm going to talk about a particular type of cascading. I mean, cascading risk, we know about risks cascading from one sector to the next, but they can also cascade in different regions. And I guess I should... Big green? This one. Indeed. Apologies. I'm going to talk about risks cascading from one part of the world to another part of the world, and highlight the justice elements related to that. Some of that work started with us thinking about what a just transition for adaptation would actually be, along the same lines as Mariam just said. Just like fossil fuel workers could be affected by climate policy and losing their lives and losing their livelihoods, their jobs, the same could happen with people who are at the receiving end of adaptation decisions by others. At around the same time, the European Commission published its adaptation strategy in 2021, and it introduced an interesting term called just resilience. Not quite the same as just transition for adaptation, but I think it's quite close. And we've started some work trying to understand what just transition and just resilience actually is, how you could measure it, how do you know that you're actually making progress towards it, but also how important is it, and some of that I'll illustrate now. One example, this is not the MENA region, but I think it's relevant here. Senegal is a food importer, particularly importing rice from South and Southeast Asia. Back in 2008, it faced a tripling of the price of rice in the global markets as a result of drought in South and Southeast Asia. Why was that? It was because rice exporting countries, Vietnam, Thailand, and India, realized that because of drought, they were going to not have the usual harvest, and because of their domestic food security, restricted or banned export of rice. That was, of course, a perhaps rational adaptation decision from an Indian or a Thai or Vietnamese perspective, but the effect it had in Senegal was riots in the streets, political instability, people actually dying as a result of that. And you can see the map there showing the dependence of Senegal on rice and the effect it had on individual consumers who were no longer able to afford rice in the markets of Senegal. So what we showed in this brief was that to ensure, I'm sure that this is very much at the bottom, I'll just read it out, ensuring that adaptation is truly just and equitable, involves avoiding actions that simply shift risks to others or reinforce existing vulnerabilities. So what we saw was that while that was a rational choice by South and Southeast Asian countries to restrict the export of rice, it had an effect on others in other countries. So what happened was the risk was not really reduced. It was shifted to other countries who were not prepared for that. And the same can be seen also within the private sector. Much of the coffee that's produced in the world is produced by smallholder farmers in Africa, in Latin America and elsewhere. And we know that these regions are exposed to climate risk. We know that therefore the farmers are exposed to climate risk. But these farmers are also exposed to decisions made in North America, in Europe, about where to actually harvest or where to source the coffee from. Contracts could be changed. Decisions made, again, in a rational manner in boardrooms in different continents could affect the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in Brazil, for example. So these coffee farmers are not only facing the risk of climate change, they're also facing the risk of adaptation decisions elsewhere. Very much in the same way as fossil fuel workers face the risk of climate policy decisions. So we see that by looking into the sort of cascading nature across borders, that adaptation truly is a global challenge. And of course, that's also what it says in the Paris Agreement. But the fact that adaptation is a global challenge is not just because adaptation is important in every single country. It's important because we're all in this together. We're all connected. COVID has shown just how connected we are, and in the same way as a virus can cross borders, climate risk can cross borders. The first is how climate impacts in one country could spill over into others. This is perhaps most easily seen through transboundary river basins, for example, where floods upstream could lead to disaster downstream or otherwise. Second is that adaptation in one country may redistribute or increase risk in other countries, and this is what we've seen, for example, in Senegal. And third, adaptation in one country may provide benefits to other countries, and this is, of course, where we would seek to go to. Now, what this means, the nature of this global challenge of adaptation, it also shows that just transition for adaptation or just resilience is a global challenge. And it requires the engagement of many more actors around the world to actually make sure that we are reducing risk and not redistributing it to others, imposing the risk on others, so to speak. So the key messages I would like to leave you with are, first, that just like mitigation, adaptation can lead to unequal and unjust outcomes. And it's often the people in places with the lowest resilience, the lowest level of wealth that are the most affected. Just resilience or just transitions for adaptation means that we are not just protecting ourselves against the risk or the impacts of climate change, but we do so justly, in a just manner. And that adaptation aimed at just resilience is indeed a global challenge because we're all inescapably intertwined, as one of the publications says. And then again, one at the very bottom that you can't read, if we plan adaptation at a local or national level only, can we be truly certain that we are reducing risk and increasing resilience for all? In other words, how can we make sure that our efforts to adapt and build resilience are truly inclusive? The really important message that I want to leave you with is that we're all in the same boat. Adaptation has often been seen as a local to national activity, and of course much of it is local to national, but there is an important global dimension, which is not the typical north against south dynamic that we often see, and the Princess also highlighted that. What happens in one part of the world can very much affect what happens here. Much of the MENA region is a food importer. and therefore we are as dependent on successful adaptation elsewhere as we are in successful adaptation domestically. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That has been really insightful and thought-provoking. It's really an excellent scene setter to the beginning of our conversation. Many important takeaways, but three that have really come out very pertinent is that adaptation risks, yes, are transboundary in nature, and same should be adaptation responses. I think we always keep saying that adaptation is local, but adaptation is also multi-level. And you've well substantiated that. Really, the local contexts in which adaptation happen are impacted by the global context at the different levels and the different risk layers as well that you've identified, and different types of risks, not just the physical risk. You've mentioned economic risk. You've mentioned social risk to social cohesion, to political unrest maybe even, and fragility. So thank you so much for shedding light on these excellent points, and that's now a smooth transition to our first panel, where we explore what different actors and organizations of our esteemed speakers are doing to address these risks, moving from cities to humanitarian early action responses, labor safety, energy and energy infrastructure, and also health for the first panel. Thank you very much, Mashal. Thank you, Richard. I now have the pleasure to invite our speakers for the first panel that we have, which is on case studies, lessons learned, and way forward on adaptation and resilience policies, programs, and resources for action. I have the pleasure to invite to the panel, please join us up here, Noha El-Tinay, who's the Senior Officer on Urban Resilience and Climate Adaptation at ICLEI. Welcome, Noha. I also would like to invite Sarah Walsh, the thematic lead on climate and resilience in the MENA region for the International Federation of Red Crescent. Very much pleased to have you, Sarah. I'd also like to invite Masako Ueda. Masako is the Regional Migration, Environment and Climate Change Specialist for the International Organization on Migration at the Regional Office for the Middle East and North Africa. Pleased as well to invite Mikhail Kanderakis from the International Labour Organization. He's the Occupational Safety and Health Specialist at the Qatar office. Finally, in person, I would like to invite Mona Khaliji, who's from the World Health Organization. Pleased to have you all. Think we are only missing Mona. Great to have you, Mona. And online, I'm very pleased to introduce Jinsun Lim. And Jinsun is an energy and environment policy analyst. She also co-leads the Sharm Adaptation Agenda Task Force or System on infrastructure, which includes energy. Welcome, everyone. I hope, Jinsun, you're connected online. And I think we have a diversity of perspectives that our speakers are going to offer. And I'm very happy to start with you, Noha, really. Noha, you're well positioned to give us this kind of holistic perspective on how cities are exposed and how they are addressing extreme heat resilience in the region. Cities are really the epitome or the hotspots of climate impacts. And urbanization is currently on the rise. That really impacts people, their health, the infrastructures that you're dependent on, nature and green spaces, services that are being provided, really so much, but I'll leave you introduce us to that. But also we would be grateful to hear some perspective. What are some of the existing solutions in the region that you can highlight? Is there any potential to scale them up, and what types of partnerships would you need to see? So many questions, but we trust we're in good hands. To you, Noha.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mariam, for the introduction. My name is Noha El-Tinay. I'm a Senior Urban Resilience and Climate Adaptation Officer from ECLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. Our office is based in Germany, but we also have around 22 offices around the world. And we are a city network of over 2,500 cities joining our network. So in terms of your first question, Mariam, of why cities, when we speak about extreme heat, obviously it's the rise of the global temperatures, but what also is important to understand here is the overlaying layer of vulnerabilities that we have within cities and the underlying risks around poverty, around elements of, the concentration of housing, the concrete pavements, roofing, all of these, I would say, physical elements that adds into the temperature, but as well as considering the impact of when we speak about vulnerable or maybe, I would say, more fragile areas within the region, how are we bringing that into the impact on the socioeconomics for the most vulnerable population, the displaced population who are moving into those cities and adding this extra layer of fragility. So keeping that in mind, the second question that we always also put for decision makers is that what does heat means when it comes into urban planning? Because the matter of the increase in temperature is something that can definitely be targeted with different mechanisms, nature-based solutions, cool roofs and cooling systems. But what is also important to consider here is how can that be funded and how could that be integrated? And the most important question, or the most pressing question that we have in the region, is the element around data. So data availability at the local level. And data here, I would like to maybe also break that down into 2 points. So data that's coming when we speak about data, for example, with sensors and collecting information around, CO2 emissions, that's something that is definitely achievable and something that we've been working on in eClay in different perspectives, in particular using data that's coming from Google and what we call the Environmental Explorer in particular. And this data have been used at different projects. So one of the projects that we've been working on that was just launched, I would say, at the beginning of last year under the Google Action Fund with the University of Dortmund in Germany, where we've been looking into collecting data and allocating sensors in certain neighborhoods where we can see the rise of heat temperatures. But what I want to say here, that it's not only about this, I would say, quantitative data. This data is being connected with observations on human behavior when we have high temperatures, and as well as I would say the key word that has been also brought up into the discussion with our keynote speakers at the beginning, which is around the just transition. So how are we really having impact for the most vulnerable population? And the big question, do we really know these people? How can we really identify them? How can we trace them? Another project also that we've been also looking into through also using the Google data, which is what we call the cool roofs and cool pavements. So mapping what the current initiatives that the city is taking in that regard and assessing its impact. Because again, the element around maladaptation is a very important concept that needs to be considered. So in certain areas, we do take measures, we do take actions, and we implement projects. But if we don't come back and with the, unfortunately, with the extreme rise of temperature and the, I would say, the frequency of the climate hazard events, the fact of going back and monitoring the impact needs to be more frequent nowadays in compared to maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Another also important element, and I've touched upon that very quickly when we speak about vulnerabilities and identifying who are the communities that are actually in need, is another project that we just launched in the region, and we are so proud of it, which is with the support of the Zurich Insurance, where we are looking into implementing a tool that has been applied since 2014 around communities' resilience assessment. And that tool have focused at that time only on flooding, but the project that we just launched last week in Izmir in Turkey is actually looking into the assessment of the impact of heat waves as well as the hazards of flooding and wildfires. And here we are looking into multiple hazards, not multi-hazards. So we are assessing the impact of each and every hazard separately. But what is really, really interesting in that project, and specifically coming to see the type of population that is being targeted. So within the city of Izmir, we've been going into one of maybe the oldest, our historical neighborhoods that around the historical sites of Agora, where Izmir, it's a coastal city, so it's used to having migrants for decades and with a long history. But getting to see communities from different parts of the region who have been affected by war and migrating to Turkey, whether not only the region, actually, the MENA region, but also the African region, how those communities are being targeted in terms of understanding how they are being affected by these climate hazards, but most importantly, what can they bring into the table? Let's not forget that women, for example, coming from Syria, have fascinating skills when it comes into agricultural activities. So what they have managed to do there is actually to allocate certain plots for women and enable them or provide them with the skills for plantation and gardening. And all of the actual vegetation products that comes out of there is something that they take immediately as part of their household income. So the food goes directly into their doorsteps. But most importantly, not only women. So we've seen also sites that has been grown by children. And again, another very interesting observation that when we were on those sites, we can see just across the other side, there is like a playground where the kids are playing. So they were telling us, watch out, the kids are watching you because these are their plots. So the element of ownership is very, very critical when we speak about climate adaptation and resilience building. Because if these communities does not understand why are we coming to them and speak about climate adaptation and climate risks, they will not be in a position to be well prepared, whether for extreme heat or even other hazards. So in that case, what we try to understand is what are actually the impacts of climate change for such communities, how is it affecting their vegetation systems within the city itself, but not to forget as well that that vegetation system have helped also tackle other hazards like landslides, where these actual plantations are taking place. But unfortunately, with the extreme heat, the actual products that came out this year are actually just half of what they used to get the years before. So now we are trying to tackle this, see what type of solutions that we are going to develop with the community by next year. But then by the third year, we're going to go back to the community and assess resilience again, because that's what we call the element of transformation. What do we mean by transforming individuals? Is it just, it's not about stopping the next flood, but it's about making the community think about, is it actually moving from one product to the other? So if they're planting, for example, aubergines, are they going to tomatoes? Because that's a better way of maintaining with the extreme heat. Maybe. Is it a different way of going into floating rice or whatever in other sectors or other regions? So this is the type of thinking that we would like to embed. And I believe that also we're going to touch upon that in other elements around resilience financing. So maybe I can come into that in a minute, Mariam, reflecting also on other speakers, parametric risk insurance, and also how can we really, after coming into that stage of communities understanding what is the risk, what type of measures they need to take, then I think they are in a position to understand why is insurance important and what type of insurance product can need to be provided for them. So I believe going through these different stages and phases of awareness raising, of understanding are really, really critical. I'll be happy also to share other sorts of examples and projects, but I'll hand over to you, Mariam.
Okay, now it's working again. Thank you. We can share the microphone, but thank you very much, Noha. This has been absolutely brilliant, and you have many takeaways. But again, data at the local level. I think we have heard that from so many partners that we have worked with, understanding the communities, understanding their needs, but also what economic opportunity that they can bring to the table. This is something important that we can harness. And I think there's a Macedonian colleague that I've worked with who kept emphasizing that a systems transformation happen or transformations happen only after massive shocks. I hope that we can try to challenge that. Unfortunately, until now, it does make sense, or it's manifesting itself, and that's also was your starting point. Only when you lost roughly half of the harvest due to extreme heat, that I don't know if you had in mind transformational approaches, but you really started this effort to see what kind of approaches or solutions that we can take to transform this year by year, not just looking at one impact or a seasonal impact, if I may say so. Thank you so much, Noha. Noted. We'll come back to you for a perspective on financing, but also to reflect on other partners. And now I'm very happy to turn to Sarah. Sarah, I know IFRC is part of the risk-informed early action partnership, which many of us know, but you have, there's a landmark report really that IFRC together with OCHA has done, and where we have seen that you've piloted really promising early action and anticipatory approaches to heat waves in some 13 lower income countries. And you have done that with partnerships with local authorities, but also different international workers. And this leads me now to the question then, what are the approaches and the policy solutions that you see coming up from your work on early action and frontline communities to respond to extreme heat, and some of the challenges, but also the opportunities and multi-partner engagement that you could have, that you could present? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting IFRC to be on this panel. It's really nice to be here. So first, let me just kind of outline the architecture of the IFRC and how I come to be here. So I work in the regional office, and the IFRC is a technical secretariat. So me and my colleague Celine, who is also here, are providing support to the national societies, so the national Red Cross or Red Crescents across the MENA region. So that's 17 national societies that we're working with and supporting. And I just want to outline, if there's one takeaway from my presentation talk to you today, is that there is a transition that's happening within these national societies because they are on the front lines of dealing with climate. And they're starting, as well as it's our global strategy is to start to tackle climate and disaster risk reduction and to build that capacity. Just imagine, being a community volunteer in Derna in Libya and experiencing that and really shifting your approach and how you want to deal and manage with disasters. So with that said, I have the honor of kind of presenting the hard work of the national societies that is being done across the region. And you mentioned the report that was released in 2022, a joint venture with IFRC and OCHA. And some of the policy solutions I think that come from that is, there's an opportunity with extreme heat to really build substantive plans and policies and frameworks that really can address many different issues. So one of the opportunities of extreme heat is that it is a forecastable event. So through that, we can flex our muscles and really become stronger as nations and as national societies in responding to that and using early action, anticipatory action, these types of approaches. So that's, I think one of the key policy recommendations to come out of that report. The other thing too, because we do have a very good understanding of who is most at risk in an event like extreme heat. And I won't go into it too much. I'm sure my colleague from WHO and IOM will talk about migrants and some of the health hazards and risks and who's most at risk there. But that's also something that the Red Cross, the Red Crescents of the society of the region are very well aware of, and particularly at the local level. So addressing the complexity and reaching those who are most at risk is another opportunity. And by dealing with them through extreme heat, it's the same category of people who are at risk to earthquakes, to a variety of other hazards as well. So it's expanding our networks and our partnerships and working with not just the Red Crescent, Red Cross societies, but also NGOs in disability and in women, working to support women and these types of things. So there's opportunities here over the next couple of years in dealing with extreme heat, I think, to strengthen all of that. Some of the challenges, yes, we do have challenges in this work. My colleague here mentioned the challenge of data, and that is something that we're definitely lacking, particularly at a local level, in sharing that data with partners, like those that are also involved in response. So it could be a national society or an allied organization like that. And risk mapping too. Do we know where these most at-risk populations are within our communities? And I think that's another challenge that we have going forward. And finally, financing. Of course, that's, you know, in every session I've been in, that's the elephant in the room. So we have this, the IFRC is the pillar 4 lead, or yeah, is a pillar lead in early warning, early action. But in our MENA region, in our geography, there are no MENA countries that are part of that initiative. So that's something to address. I think we need to advocate more for funding to come to this region. But that said, we are working on building capacity. So I just wanted to, you know, in the complexity of the region and to bring it back to the national society. The Palestinian Red Crescent, you know, in light of recent events, I just want to highlight that, you know, less than a month ago, they had a multi-day workshop in their national society on how they can increase and better work on early warning, early action throughout their national society. So, despite the complexity, this is still ongoing in the national societies. And we're also building capacity as well. So you know, in this sort of challenging operational environment, we are working in spite of the lack of funding and finding other opportunities. So the IFRC and the WFP, I'm looking at our Habibi Omar, who's going to be up here talking soon. But what we're doing is a project that's looking at building systems in Syria, Palestine, Iraq, and Yemen, and strengthening those systems for early warning, early action, so that you know, end to end, from national Met Office to internally displaced persons, that messaging is reached from sort of end to end user. So there are initiatives happening and underway, and we are building capacity. And I think that our national societies, whether they're Red Crescents, Red Crosses, are partners in this. And I just wanted to highlight that.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And if I may, so a really positive takeaway is extreme heat is forecastable, and that's I think that's a very important takeaway, especially that as of now, there are no as well MENA countries partners of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership. So, and I think it plays a key role in implementing what we call the Early Warning for All initiative as well. You've paved the way very nicely then to go to Masako from IOM, because you have mentioned opportunity. Noha has spoken already to displacement and the economic opportunities that they bring. Sarah, you brought to context Libya. And Libya is really a manifestation, is a live, sad manifestation of how impacts can strike and how communities can be displaced. So between this opportunity, that of course between the fragility and the complex risks that those communities are facing, but also the opportunity that they can bring. Masako, could you give us a perspective on how the IOM is addressing inclusive climate resilience through this human mobility lens?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mariam. And first of all, thank you so much for inviting International Organization for Migration to this very important event. I'm honored to be here. So my name is Masako Ueda. I'm normally based in Cairo, working for the regional office of IOM for Middle East and North Africa. So I would like to start perhaps citing some figures, because the previous speakers mentioned already about displacement in this region. The MENA region has a highly complex human mobility landscape. The region has 16.2 million internal displaced persons at the end of 2022. So this is not including the current crisis ongoing in Sudan. And that makes the region the second highest in terms of the concentration of IDPs following sub-Saharan Africa. Furthermore, as I think Sarah mentioned already, the region also has a quite significant number of international migrant workers, the figure of which is over 24 million, according to the ILO figure in 2019. And this is across 12 Arab states. And most of them, as we know, are concentrated in the Gulf countries. Furthermore, the region is highly vulnerable to climate change effects, and with increasing number of high-impact disasters, as Maria mentioned about Libya crisis, I mean the floods disaster, which has displaced over 42,000 people. So climate resilience requires a combined effort of resilient people and livelihood, resilient businesses and economies, and resilient environment system as per the vision statement of the UNFCCC Climate Action Pathway. Mobile population, notably IDPs and migrants with irregular status and precarious working conditions, they are among the most vulnerable, as it's been cited a number of times, to the climate risks. Since their pre-existing vulnerabilities amplify their exposure to climate change effects, including the health impact linked to the extreme heat. When extreme heat wave hit, they are disproportionately exposed to the heat-related illnesses and risks which are amplified by the inadequate shelter accommodation, limited access to cooling, water scarcity, and economic hardships. We know that the mobile populations are an integral part of social fabric in the MENA region. They make significant economic contribution to the both sides of the migration corridors through rendering their labor to the labor market in the destination countries, but also sending remittance to the origin countries. So IOM calls for making climate resilience inclusive of all mobile populations, including those the most vulnerable. IOM promotes a solution-oriented approach to integrate human mobility into climate resilience action in line with our 10-year institutional strategy on migration, environment, climate change. Our strategy is underlined by 3 strategic objectives, which is putting migrants at the center of our action. The first objective is strategy for people to move. We work with the government to improve migration management systems in a context of climate change, including creating and enabling the regular and safe migration pathways. Second objective is we provide solutions for people to on the move. Some people, or a lot of people actually, in fact, in the context of climate change, are already on the move in highly vulnerable situations, including IDPs, and we provide humanitarian assistance. The third objective is we provide solutions for people to stay. We work towards making a migration a choice rather than a necessity whenever it's possible by building resilience through and also addressing the adverse mobility drivers through disaster risk reduction and also adaptation action. Our strategy is strongly aligned with the Global Compact for Safe, Regular and Orderly Migration, GCM, which has been signed by over 160 member states of the UN as the UN first ever global agreement on the international migration. The GCM recognizes the climate change effect as adverse mobility drivers and call for the action to minimize such adverse drivers. Our action is also strongly aligned with the UN Secretary General's action agenda on internal displacement, which include commitment to prevent displacement linked to the climate change and disasters. I would like to share 2 examples of IOM's ongoing effort to promote inclusive climate resilience with a human mobility lens. First example is our recent Gulf sub-regional workshop in Kuwait, focusing on the interlinkages between climate change, migration, and health, and their impact on host societies and temporary contractual workers. This workshop provided a platform for policy-oriented discussions based on the exchange of initiative and good practices of the Gulf country to respond to this nexus, and also discuss gaps and challenges. The workshop has resulted in 11 recommendations, including the importance of linking health adaptation planning with urban planning in an inclusive manner, recognition of unequal distribution of climate change impact on health, and ensuring provision of health care for temporary contractual workers, both physical health care and mental health care. Role of employers and businesses to protect workers from the effect of climate change, particularly heat stress, reinforcement of government policies, and also using migrant orientation program to sensitize temporary contractual workers to the health risk of climate change. Another example that I would like to quickly touch upon how IOM is promoting at the global level in terms of inclusive climate resilience is to integrate human mobility consideration into national adaptation plans. Adaptation actions such as adopting climate-smart agriculture, diversifying livelihood options can contribute to abating and minimizing forced migration. Concurrently, migration can be an effective adaptation strategy if it takes place in a safe, regular, and orderly manner. IOM has been working to integrate human mobility consideration into NAP since the 2010 Cancun Adaptation Framework. And currently, IOM and the University of Vienna in Austria is co-developing a supplement on human mobility for the UNFCCC technical guidance for the NAP process, based on the experience of several countries which are already mainstreaming climate change, human mobility into the NAP formulation processes. So just as a final recommendation and remarks from IOM is that inclusive climate resilience with a human mobility lens will enable us to make tangible progress towards leave no one behind as a central and transformative promise of sustainable development goals. As we confront the reality of the climate change, it's crucial for us to build and enhance inclusive climate resilience, not only in terms of infrastructure, but also including human mobility consideration into NAP and relevant policies, and also make sure that active inclusion of the vulnerable community in the decision-making processes. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Masako, for these perspectives and insights. I think a major takeaway is really leaving no one behind. And you've earlier spoke to the nexus of migration, health, and workers, which also takes us smoothly to our next speaker, which is Mikhail Kanderikis. Mikhail, you'll provide perspectives on addressing extreme heat stress on labor, their productivity, and also the concept of decent work. I mean, in the recent report, there have been some reports actually by the ILO addressing heat impacts on workers, and the figures vary. So there's roughly a 30% decrease in labor's productivity that has been attached to the MENA region, with far-reaching impacts on national GDPs. Could you please give us an insight on how the ILO is paving the way for more resilient conditions for workers? To you, Mikhail.
Thank you, Mariam. Please allow me, first of all, I would like to express my pleasure and my honor to be among colleagues from other international organizations here. We have a very good collaboration with all of them at institutional and personal levels sometimes, and all of you for being here. Now, I represent the International Labour Organization, and there is one, I would say, positive or happy peculiarity of my organization in the more general UN system. And that is that we are the only organization that we are effectively and practically governed by a our tripartite constituents. This means that we hold at various stages per year in-person consultations with all the governments, the employer and the workers' organizations that constitute the UN as a system. And this is actually the first point that I wanted to make, that any kind of measure, if we're talking about ownership, if we're talking about feasibility, if we're talking about sustainability of the measures that we are taking to combat climate change and its effects, we have to talk about tripartite consultations. This is the term that we use in the ILO, but the meaning is the same. The workers, employers, their representatives, and of course the governments must be part of it, especially because the workers and the employers are the ones that are on the ground. They are experiencing the problems, and they are the ones that have to have ownership of the solutions. Now, for the ILO, the impact of climate change in the world of work, that is our special area of work, of course, has been obvious and relevant for many years now. Through this consultative process that we follow in the ILO, we have developed in 2015, in 2015, we have developed the guidelines for just transition to environmentally sustainable economies and societies. This, as all the documents, all the policy documents we create and we develop at the ILO, is a product of those consultations between the governments, the employers, and the workers. And it is also, let's say, an umbrella, a generic policy document that does include specific measures that the states have to take in order for this just transition to be towards environmentally sustainable, but also socially sustainable economies. But at the same time, as a generic policy document, it has been supplemented since 2015 with a number of other more specific policy documents on specific areas of work. The last one that I would like to talk to you a little bit about today has been actually published and adopted this last September of 2023. And it talks about the implications of climate change and the implications of just transitions for exactly occupational safety and health of the workers. Now, we're talking about displacement, and of course this is a big issue. What we have understood and what we are discussing from the ILO perspective is that climate change that it's been unfortunately accelerated in the last years not only creates social and geographical realities that bring about this displacement of workers, but also brings about changes, rapid and radical changes in the world of work at local, regional, and global level. This means that we have the disappearance of some of entire sectors of work, like coal, for example, or the serious diminishment of entire sectors of work. And at the same time, we have changes in the business models, changes in the processes of work in many sectors and in many countries that, on one hand, create the need to re-educate, retrain workers to transition to this, to new models of work, but also at the same time create the need for them to displace themselves and find work elsewhere. So all this calls for the governments, again, in consultation with workers and employers, to come about with inclusive occupational safety and health policies that take into account all these changes and create an environment where people can be retrained and where people can have decent working conditions through the protection of their health and their safety. Being already the third, fourth speaker, I have noted here some key terms that my previous fellow speakers mentioned and that are very important also for my presentation. We are talking about data, for example. We are talking about the need to have more information. Climate change issues and heat exposure issues are very important and they are very multidimensional, which really presents the need to have as much information as we can about the effects of heat stress to workers' health and safety, but also the effects on the productivity and, of course, the effects on the world of work in general. Another term that that was mentioned by Sarah before was risk mapping. In the ILO, we call it risk assessment, which has to be done at enterprise level, but also at national or regional level in order for the governments to be able to better understand what are the risks are and what are the pertinent measures to mitigate and combat these risks. And of course, it was also mentioned about capacity building and awareness raising, I would suggest, which means that both government officials, labor inspectors, any other officer that is working in the world of work have to be trained, have to be more aware of what their responsibilities are and what the dangers are. And at the same time, workers and employers have to be informed and educated about what is their part in dealing, in mitigating climate change and heat stress and heat exposure. Masako mentioned the 25 million international migrant workers. I would say there is also, in the same report, there is also a figure of 80 million hours of lost productivity hours lost in the region due to climate change in the next years. I think it's up to until 2026. And also, we are talking about economies that are heavily dependent on migrant work. It was also mentioned. I can tell you it's been a fact that is boggling my mind since I went to Qatar. In Qatar, we're talking about 97% of the working population being migrants. Of course, I'm talking they are ranging from high-earning, high-salary CEOs of companies up to minimum wage workers. But we are talking about 97% of the working population. This is a huge number. This is an economy that is entirely dependent on migrants. And yet, as it was also said before, we didn't wait for entire crops to be wasted to do something, but still the issue of researching and doing something about heat stress has been at least dormant for years. Now, I will go to the region. I will tell you about some parts of a significant work that we've been doing with the government of Qatar, obviously in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor there. But first, I would like to say that all countries of the Gulf region, all GCC countries, have some kind of protective legislation against heat stress and heat exposure. This legislation has been, until very recently, only limited essentially to banning outdoor work for specific periods during the year and specific hours during the day, which is an important measure. But it has two significant problems. First of all, it's piecemeal. It's a piecemeal solution. It doesn't cover all the problems that might arise from exposure to heat. And the second thing is, because of climate change issues and because of the, I would say, the volatility of climate now and climate phenomena, those working hours and this ban of working hours and working days often does not cover the hours or the days of the year that workers are exposed to extreme heat. Yes. So, three main points about how we approached our work about heat stress in Qatar. We started with commissioning a very comprehensive, big research. It involved around 60,000 people, 60,000 workers in agriculture and construction, done by a specialized university in my home country, Greece. Based on this research, there were a number of recommendations. Yes, I will just take 3 more minutes. A number of recommendations about policy change and legislation change. We increased the number of hours of this ban on outdoor work. We introduced annual health checks for all workers that are affected by heat, so they are working mostly outdoors. We introduced the obligation for risk assessment at enterprise level done and paid for by the employers, and also we introduced the right of the worker to remove themselves from work whenever they feel threatened or they feel that they are unwell due to heat exposure. And final word, 3 recommendations for the region coming from our work in Qatar and also our global perspectives as ILO. We have to deepen the research, and we have to deepen the research in order to inform better policies and better legislations, not only in the region globally, but we are talking about the region here. Second, we have to strengthen the labor inspection and the compliance systems in each of our countries. Unfortunately, legislations have to be enforced, but also fortunately, workers and employers have to be educated so that they participate in the compliance, the self-compliance with such legislations. And the third one, I would say, is that we not only have to have fora and platforms like this one to exchange technical knowledge and discuss, we have to have operational links and operational coordination among regional players, regional countries, and again at global level. It was mentioned about the early warning and early action systems. These have to be operational. This has to be a meteorological station that will be able to inform Qatar, Emirates, Saudi about upcoming phenomena. There has to be operational collaboration of all players in the region in protecting and also in advising legislation and policy. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. This has been really excellent and comprehensive. I took many takeaways, but inclusive policies, opportunities, including retraining, research, and data, etc., compliance, and operational links. And we're very happy as well from the Champions team to draw these operational links with many of our partners, but particularly we'd be very, very happy to establish a connection with our business leaders group. So the high-level champions are also convening a business leaders group, and really adaptation has been that one issue that really needs to be demystified. So we're very happy to draw that operational link, and thank you so much, and sorry that I've been rushing a bit as we're behind time. We move next. I think all of our speakers have mentioned health. So Mona, a nice combination coming into. Could you give us a perspective on how the heat action and planning is unveiling in this region? Are we well covered, and what are the next steps that need to happen? Apologies, I will need to urge you to stick to 4 to 5 minutes.
Hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, first of all, and rightly, all the UN agencies here and the active members for bringing together all the activities in the ground, in the field, from policies to the field and from the field to the policies, let's say. I want to just highlight, I will be brief, being the last person gives more, perspective of time as well. So I will, this slide is actually the comprehensive, staying in that, and I might skip some of the, there are a few slides, but I will skip them. But just having a comprehensive approach for on the impact of climate change on health is key, and that's how WHO is approaching. So it's mainly focusing on climate resilience and environmental sustainability of healthcare facilities, and has certain guidelines to improve that. And there has been very good examples in this region conducting the baseline assessments as well as the strategic directions for that as a whole, like a comprehensive approach. But when we are here for heat specifically, and the impact of heat, the exposure pathways are shown on this screen of, as mentioned, generally climate change on health and the health risks that we have, which heat is among them, but the impacts, the outcome of that, health outcomes as well as on the health system and the facilities are shown here. But what I'm going to give you is an example within WHO, another region, Euro region. They conducted a very good work on planning for heat because of the heat waves, the recent heat waves that hit several European countries. and they have created very good, planning framework, let's say, which includes, which suggests that the long-term planning is very important, while we need to have also short-term preparation before the summer, prevention during the summer, and specific response for the heat wave for vulnerable communities and people, and having certain monitoring and evaluation systems. For that, there are 8 core elements that all came out from this exercise in the Euro region, which included the process of this is called Heat Health Action Planning, which HHAP, which is a multi-sectoral management, risk management framework. It has 8 elements, which starts from the governance. Of course, having let's say, agreement on the leading role, who leads the public health aspects, having a good governance from the top, and have timely alert systems. We all discussed on that, the early warning systems that we have to improve and strengthen. We have to have information planning for communicating the health risks, which contribute, the early warning system contribute to that. We need to have a reduction. We all mentioned about the outdoor heat and the impact of that, and I wanted to share one or a few, impacts that it has on health. On the outdoor, we all know we get dehydrated, but there are cardiovascular and respiratory diseases that comes from it, and workers specifically who are working outside are exposed to that, and mortalities and morbidities from that are substantial. Workers who are frequently exposed to the heat are fourfold in increase of likelihood of clinical heat-related symptoms. They have 0.7 higher body temperatures, 14.5% increase in markers of dehydration, and 15% of risk to kidney disease and acute kidney injuries. These are like published data. But for the indoor, also this was the interesting outcome of this study and work by the WHO, to pay attention to the indoor heat as well, the exposure of the indoor heat, to also have mitigations for that, such as, which was interesting for me also, to look at its correlation with the urban planning, because there are passive cooling approaches for the buildings that helps this. Also long-term planning, urban planning is included in this kind of the 8 core elements. And particular care for the vulnerable population groups, which includes the children, elderlies, as well as the migrants, the marginalized people, and so on and so forth. We need to also have the preparedness of the health and social care systems. That's where that healthcare facilities resilience comes into a role and needs to be strengthened. As mentioned, the long-term urban planning and reducing the heat risks is very important as a long-term approach, and have surveillance and data, we all mentioned. The real-time surveillance and monitoring is another factor to be considered.
Thank you so much, Mona. This has been excellent, and I'm very happy as well to announce that we're also partnering with the World Health Organization and the IFRC towards launching specific health-related outcomes as part of the Sharm Adaptation Agenda. Like Mona has mentioned, we know from the IPCC and from real action on the ground that impacts on people, but also on the healthcare facilities themselves, their resilience, and taking there are different approaches. One of them is taking also a one planetary health approach. So we're exploring all of those dimensions, and we're looking at launching specific outcomes as part of the Sharm adaptation agenda at COP28. And we look forward to working with a series of partners on bringing the implementation of many of those solutions to fruition. With that, I thank you very much. It has been an excellent panel. Noha, I owe you some connection as well on finance, but cognizant that we're running out of time, it has been a really engaging panel. I thank you all, and we'll be certainly connecting over the course of this event and afterwards. Thank you very much. So before we fully close this panel, we're happily as well joined online by Jinsun Lim from the IEA. If I may invite our technicians and colleagues supporting to bring in Lim on screen. Lim, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
This is wonderful. It's great to have you with us, Jinsun. Jinsun, the IEA, you particularly, together with a team of 2 other colleagues, have done a very interesting analytical piece, followed by a series of workshops on particularly that climate resilience for energy transitions in the MENA region. We're very happy to hear from you more on this and how this can be actualized in beyond Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan as well, which I understand have been your case studies. To you, Jinsun.
Thank you very much. Can you see my presentation on the screen? The technician team, could you share my presentation on the screen?
If I may refer to the technicians to revert back to the presentations, if it's technically challenging, may I invite you to start while the technicians will bring it on screen?
Okay, great. I would like to talk about the rising temperatures and their extreme heat events and how they affect the energy systems.
We see it on the screen now. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. So rising temperatures and extreme heat events raise concerns for the energy system resilience in the region. In all scenarios, MENA region is projected to experience a higher increase in temperature than the world average. In this map, you can see the estimated mean temperature increases under the SSP2 4.5 scenario by the end of the century. Although the world average temperature rise is projected to be around 2.7 degrees under this scenario, a major part of the MENA region is likely to experience much higher temperature increase than the world average, as you can see. Such temperature increases with more frequent extreme heat events could pose a double challenge to energy demand and supply. These higher projected summer temperatures are likely to trigger a notable increase in peak electricity demand during summer with more extensive use of air conditioning. Please stay in the first slide, please. In Oman, peak electricity demand increased from 6,000 megawatts in 2015 to more than 7,000 megawatts in 2021, with average annual growth rate of about 3%. And it's likely to continue rising by around 4% per year until 2027. While higher temperature raise peak electricity demand, they also curtail the efficiency of power generation and networks, adding further stress to electricity supply. So in the map, you can see the solar PV and wind power plants where they are located. They are generally designed to best function around 25 degrees Celsius. Their power generation efficiency degrades as the temperature increases. Furthermore, extreme heat can also increase the electrical resistance of the circuits and damage the cell and other materials used for these power plants. Although there are new cooling technologies and designs being developed and deployed to improve the generation efficiency of these power plants, a rapid increase in extreme heat events could be a risk. It's not only the case of the new renewable power plants. Please go to the next slide, please. A hotter climate can reduce the performance of natural gas-fired power plants, which is currently accounting for the largest share of electricity generation in the region. This is because gas-fired power plants can be negatively affected by warmer air mass flow entering the gas turbine compressor. According to our assessment, more than 80% of the installed capacity of gas-fired power plants in the region face an annual addition of more than 20 hot days by the end of the century, even in a low emission scenario. If it is in a high emission scenario, it will be over 60 days. Please go to the next slide, please. The temperature increase and its effects on meteorological and hydrological systems are also triggering another major concern. Decreasing rainfall and increasing incidence of droughts have become a major threat to some of the energy systems in MENA countries, particularly in the southern and eastern Mediterranean region. Total precipitation in the southern and eastern Mediterranean region has decreased by around 8.3% per decade in the period of last 4 decades. And its annual mean precipitation is projected to further decrease in these countries, while some of the Arabian Peninsula countries might experience some increase. Declining water availability is particularly important because it's negatively impacts fossil fuel, the thermal power plants, which account for more than 90% of their electricity generation, and they are relying on fresh water for cooling down power plants. In all climate scenarios, more than 90% of the fossil fuel, the thermal power plants in the southern and eastern Mediterranean region are projected to see a drier climate in the coming decades, although the level of aridity may differ among plants and among scenarios. So, of course, these countries have already made efforts to reduce cooling water requirements and seek alternative water resources. So, for instance, Morocco is gradually replacing its coal-fired power plants with natural gas combined cycle power plants, which require less cooling water. And Egypt adopted more water efficiency options and also reduced its dependency on fresh water by using seawater. Some renewable energy technologies such as solar PV and wind turbines are more resilient to drier climates because they require little or no water for operation. Moreover, their reduced greenhouse gas emissions could contribute to creating a virtuous cycle, mitigating climate change and consequently curtailing shifts in precipitation patterns. These all show that climate resilience and adaptation, clean energy transitions, and energy security are all interlinked. The support ongoing and future efforts towards climate resilient, clean, and secure energy transitions in the region. IEA has released, as Maria mentioned, a series of country reports on climate resilience for energy transitions in the region, and we are also planning to extend its work to other countries next year. We look forward to collaborating with the region, countries, and international organizations, fellow speakers who are already on the stage, to develop comprehensive assessments of various climate hazards and also try to discuss how to further improve our existing policy measures for adaptation and resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zinsun, for this excellent presentation, but also drawing upon the linkages between just energy transitions, but also just transitions to resilience. We are now seeing that even the solar, that even the renewable energies that we're laying in place may also be or are strongly at risk from extreme heat. And that's why we have to simultaneously tackle both in integrated ways. With that, I thank you, and we are starting the next panel, and I'm very pleased to invite to join us Omar Farouk from World Food Programme and Nuhad Awet from Greenpeace, and she's the lead for Ummah for Earth. She's the lead campaigner and she's the global outreach coordinator. I'd like to invite you to the panel. Our existing panelists, you're welcome to stay, but you also may feel free to join the floor. We're cognizant that we're a little bit behind time. But I would like to actually start this session by going to Dr. Helmi Abulaish, the CEO of SECOM Initiative, and he's joining us virtually. So may I kindly invite as well our technicians to take us to the virtual participation. Dr. Helmi, we hope that you can hear us. Dr. Helmi Abulaish is the CEO of SECOM Initiative, and SECOM is a really pioneer and unique example of sustainable business on food and community resilience. Dr. Helmi, we also know that you're working on upscaling and reaching up to thousands of partners in the region. Over to you, Dr. Helmi, and may I ask our technicians as well to turn to the presentation. Dr. Helmi Abulaish, do you hear us?
Yes, I thought I will move my presentation. This is also okay. If you do it for me, I'm very happy. Then
Alrighty,
I can focus on.
Sure,
the presentation.
done that. Please alert me when you want to change slides.
I will. I'm just now trying to come out of this interesting screen podcast. You see me, yeah, right?
We do not see you, but we see the slides.
Okay, it's very interesting for me, but I'm just seeing now my own screen. Never mind. What I would like to share with you, and I'm happy to do this here on this panel on this occasion. What I would like to share is our experience in Egypt, our experience how to combine climate action, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, with rural development, improving the livelihood of farmers, and moving to regenerative and organic agriculture. And this is also what we aim to upscale at the moment. So we are working now with several thousand farmers in Egypt, and we are looking forward to do the same with 40,000 farmers until 2025. So what I would like to get you on this second slide is a quick introduction. What is, and whereas I don't see the presentation, I hope you see here on this slide my father, Ibrahim Olej, who founded SECOM in 1977. He founded it with very strong vision. He's founded it with a vision to create a model for system change, and this was very early, 1977, which really addresses the issues of system change on many of the economic issues we are all facing nowadays, and I don't have to dig in, and of course also the cultural issues related to education and research, and the issues related to societal challenges we are facing in our region. So, in particular, what was strange for everyone around and for his family and for the expert was that he wanted to found all this on biodynamic or organic agriculture in the desert. Nobody did then in 1977 believe that this could ever work. We are now one slide too far already, but what I can say is that against all the odds and against all the logic, an initiative like SECOM, which was really established on biodynamic farming as a principle, on something we call economy of love as the way we manage our supply chain. Now we are again one slide too far. Stay at this one, it's okay. No, at the last one.
Okay.
No problem, no problem. And actually, on focusing on really unfolding the potential of each one of our community members, this business model didn't seem to be very attractive to most of the people in 1977. But against all odds, this miracle unfolded then over the next 40 years, which you can see here in some very few pictures. But today, we were able to reclaim desert. We were able to establish a real oasis with all kinds of crops available in Egypt. Thousands of farmers are following this example of biodynamic agriculture. But not only biodynamic agriculture has proven to be working, also the economy of love has proven to be working, because we have today nearly 2,000 people in Egypt, co-workers, who process the biodynamic raw materials to foodstuff and beverages and garments and pharmaceuticals, which are mainly sold in the local market. So they are every day able to prove that a supply chain where everyone is really seen, where we try to give a fair share of the profit to everyone from the farmer to the final consumer, and a supply chain where also everyone has an opportunity to learn and develop himself, can be competitive in an environment where you have all the big multinational players and local competitors. We are market leaders in some of the segments. So economy of love seemed to work, and at the same time, you can also see from these pictures, we have today a school with several hundred or even more than 1,000 kids, many different schools, which really use a holistic educational system for these people in the rural area. And even a university, the Heliopolis University for Sustainable Development, with 5 faculties and 3,000 students, focusing on organic agriculture, renewable energy, and so on. So all this said, the question, of course, was, and this is on the next slide, in 2017, having achieved all these miracles, what's next? And particularly when my father passed away in 2017, we as the Future Council of SECAM came together and asked ourselves, what is it what we want to achieve over the next 40 years? Particularly as we really had to state that SECAM as a nice model, a lighthouse in the desert, has proven that it works, but only very few of the 7 million farmers of Egypt, or 1.4 million teachers, or the 3 million entrepreneurs, or have really taken on this model into the Egyptian society. So we actually decided to switch dramatically our SECAM vision for our organization, which you can see on the next slide, where we said, okay, let's focus for the next 40 years on being an innovation center, a center for social innovation in Egypt and the world, where we focus not on growing our organization, having more employees, more teambags, more products, more farmers or students in our university, but instead making sure that our model is really disseminated into the society and is inspiring other organizations to do the same. And as a result, we started then to work with many of our partner organizations in Egypt on what you can see on the next slide, a really holistic vision how Egypt will look like in 2057 if we achieve our goals. And this example for the SECAM vision goals in 2057, which you see in front of you, which is very much based on the 4 dimensions of sustainable development. So it touches on the economic aspects, on societal aspects, on the cultural aspects, and of course on the ecological aspects. And in these 4 dimensions, we have defined 16 SECAM vision goals, which, for example, state all of the 7 million farmers of Egypt will apply biodynamic or organic farming in 2057, or all institutions engaged in education, whether it's school or university, will apply lifelong learning concepts and potential unfolding concepts, or all the companies of Egypt will apply circular economy and the principles of what we call economy of love. Now, this is something we report on every year. I invite everyone to look in our website and see how is it going with these 16 SECAM vision goals. For the sake of today, I want to use only one example. It's the example of how to upscale organic sustainable agriculture. No, one slide back, please, because before I move to this one, I want just to state that at the very beginning of of this example, I have to clarify that whereas we are applying organic or biodynamic farming since 46 years now, and it works, and many thousand farmers in Egypt apply, and it works. The question was, why do not every farmer of Egypt apply it? And the first answer was, it's too expensive. It's more expensive than conventional farming, and hence it will not every consumer will be able to use it, and not every farmer will be able to sell it. So then we did some true cost accounting reports, which you find on our website. And these true cost accounting reports all actually came to the same conclusion. The conclusion was organic farming today is cheaper than conventional farming if you do not allow the externalization of costs to future generations in regard to climate change, or the current society in regard to pollution of water and many other things. And this is what led us then go into the next slide, when we said, okay, if organic farming is really giving an ecosystem service regarding climate change by not emitting CO2, but instead sequestering CO2, let's prototype. And we used one of our own farms on about 800 acres for 1.5 years to prototype and see how much carbon can we sequester in our soil, in our trees, how much methane do we avoid, methane emissions do we avoid when we make our own compost, and when we ultimately switch the whole farming system to renewable energy. And the result was 12,000 tons with a value of nearly 300,000 euros. And for everyone in Egypt, this is clearly stating that 10, 12, 13,000 pounds, Egyptian pounds per acre, then is just more than what we earn from our crops. So when we said, okay, maybe this is a lever for system change, maybe this is something which can change the equation, we went in the next phase, which we presented last year at COP27, to 2,000 new farmers, 2,100 new farmers in Egypt, and worked with them on small holding farms, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 acres, to do the same. And guess what? You see it here. It worked again. All these farmers were able, according to the number of trees, the soil management, compost produced, and so on, to also issue carbon credits.
Dr. Helmi, apologies. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it's great. We just need to wrap up shortly, so appreciate that.
Okay, let me just say we are now in the next phase already, in the phase 3, where we go to 40,000 farmers. We hope that this will be reached in 2025, and I hope personally that we at COP28 can then also make our plea and call, which we have issued in a joint call, which I have provided to you, Mariam, where we really ask for the 4 things needed, which is a unified standard, which is a good governance system with high integrity, which is funding for the transition, and of course, access for smallholder farmers. If all this is given, then I think these miracles are possible everywhere, and we must move just from knowing all these facts in implementing them to make a real contribution to system change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helmi. This has been very informative and also a very promising example. And let me also reinstate that you're one of our global ambassadors on food, one who we have worked with throughout the years for COP27 and COP28. Thank you very much for that. Apologies, cognizant we're behind on time. I had to interrupt, but that's now a natural flow to Omar Farouk, from the Specialist on Early Action and Climate Services from the World Food Programme. Omar, you're well positioned to give us an insight on early action in food systems, which is a big topic for this year, but also financing and nature-based solutions. To you, Omar.
Yeah, but before that, how are you doing, everyone? It has been one-sided for 1.5 hours, so yeah, I'm just checking if you're with. But lunch will be there till 2, okay? And I do buy Sikkim tea if you buy them, like it's really nice. Anyway, very shortly, thank you, Mariam. I think those who are here in this conference, we are all kind of talking about how conscious we are about climate, right? How we are accessing information about climate and the changes, how it impacts our personal life, why you should not use plastic cups outside or do recyclable things. And I think that same thing kind of reflects when we work as a World Food Program now, how we are really changing our resilience strategy and climate change strategy, and how our people, like the people that we work with, their communities, like the photos that you saw at SECEM that people are circling around, how they can also do the same with the right tools and resources. And that's what the food system that we're talking about. So we are trying to strengthen the weather information system a little bit better for everyone, including them, so that they can take better decisions. And to do so, our traditional food aid system is changing. Cash-based transaction. We're not going to hand out rice sacks to climate resilience program. Yes, maybe for first 3 months when the disaster struck, yes. But how we can really make most out of it by understanding what and how we are producing food locally, how we are moving food, okay? If you go to a supermarket, the imported items are always expensive. Why the people who doesn't have money should buy those expensive food where there's an option to grow it locally. And that's where we're trying to focus on, and that's why organizations like SECEM will be more important. And just to remind you, in this MENA region, this is becoming a complex situation, not only because of climate change, but also lack of regenerative environmental production. We're not regenerating the lands that we're losing because of conflict. Our water situation is not good. So how we can prepare this watershed management? So with the humanitarian funding, as it's decreasing, whatever is left, we're trying to really think and become, we're late, to be honest. Like as a UN organization, we should have done it like 15, 20 years back, right? But can we really work with this small money to say, look, this is a disaster situation, but this is how things have changed. And to do that, the program that we are doing jointly with IFRC, it's basically information, building trust. Please trust that the season has changed. Please trust that you should do more organic things. It's also building trust with private sector, not to push us with fertilizer much, okay? Not to push at business only, but proper only. Greenpeace is here. I always wanted to work with them, but never happened. But anyway, so this is the food system that we're talking, okay? We'll be here during the week. Please feel free to talk to us that how we're doing. But we're not going to say that we have already done a lot. MENA is not a very suitable region to do all of these things, but we're glad that the attention is here. We have 2 COPs in this region. We have amazing delegates here this time in MENA Climate Week. And this is the partnership that we're talking about, where the transaction is more human, not monetary, where I understand what Greenpeace's role in my personal life, not as WFP, but as a human, where others understand what we can do for others. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Omar. This is excellent. And note taken, we couldn't really resist the temptation of having this diversity of perspective, and we ran over time. So indeed, it is, until now, a one-sided conversation until we're kicked out of this room, but we're actually at time, and it's time to have now Nohad. Nohad, you bring a very unique perspective. You, first of all, let me first attest to your multiple hats. So you have been previously part of the NGOs and then Yungo. You played different roles within the climate process, from negotiation to implementation to observing. Want to hear your unique perspective on resilience, actually, from Greenpeace. And we know that you're the lead campaigner on Ummah for Earth campaign. Nohad, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Mariam, for the nice introduction, and thank you, Omar, for the nice transition. And we are always happy to work with you. And I would like to start. I'll be very short. I'd like to start by saying that Ummah for Earth is an alliance-led project, which means we started back in 19 October 2020 as 5 organizational allies. Now we are 24 organizational allies and 7 individual ones. We aim to create a climate movement within Muslim communities, those communities that are vulnerable to climate change, those communities that are mostly affected by climate change, and they are adhering the adverse effect of climate change, but unfortunately they are the least one that led and caused climate change. So I'll start by saying that I'm not going to details on the effect of climate change. We have our colleagues from WHO who stated how this is going to affect the health and how people are going to be affected. I would like to say that we're going to have more dehydration, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And some of the projections say that if the rise of temperature is between 1.5 and 2 degrees, the number of heart strokes for people going to Hajj will be 5 more times. And if the rise in temperature becomes more than 2 degrees, the projection is the estimation it will be 10 more times having heat stroke for people, for pilgrims. So we in Ummah for Earth, with our ally Global One, launched a green guide for Hajj and Umrah in English, Arabic, Malay language, and Indonesian Bahasa that shows how it's important to have a green Hajj or Umrah, because Hajj is once per year and Umrah can be done on a monthly basis. And that there is recommendations for us on individual level that we can take by taking transportation as the train, and like by choosing hotels that take eco tips into consideration, or there are also recommendations for companies and other recommendations for governments. This shows that the solution is in our hand. And another thing also we worked on, also that is another example of we have the solution. We worked with the American University of Beirut, Issam Ferris Institute, on the importance of solarizing mosques. And 10 mosques around the world were taken as case studies. For example, Al-Azhar Mosque in Egypt, Al-Madina Mosque in Saudi Arabia, Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Syria, Istiqlal Mosque in Indonesia, and many other around the world. And one of them was Glasgow Central Mosque. And with a fund from our ally, Islamic Relief Worldwide, we put 120 panels on the Glasgow Central Mosque. And this shows it's not only that we are able to green mosques and make them on solar energy and have green gardens, but also shows the importance of using these community buildings to mobilize people and to take the help of the administration of these community buildings to communicate to people through their values and bring them on board. As mentioned, solution is in our hand. And here I would like to add that we need to work, and here like going back to what Mariam loves, to work and having better water governance, management of extreme weather events, especially in vulnerable places, adapting to sea level rise. And we have seen lately the floods that happen in Pakistan. We have also Somalia projections it's gonna be more affected. Bangladesh gonna face more floods. The latest IPCC report showed that catastrophes that used to happen once per 100 years, they are likely to happen once per year. So all of these extreme weather events that are going to become more often due to climate change, and especially extreme heat waves, we need to all work with each other on adaptation, on improving agriculture productivity without toxifying the soil, on building climate resilience infrastructure and urban planning. And here I would like to mention one of the things that Princess Masha'al was saying. We need to hear the stories of the people. And we launched an Ummah for Earth story map. And in the first week, we collected 63 stories. And the first month, we collected more than 100 stories. And in this story map, there are 2 types of stories. Stories of vulnerability, where people shared how did the climate change affected their lives. A person from Tunisia shared how did the floods in Nabil obliged him to leave his house. And other people shared stories of action. A person from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia shared how he saved a fox in the desert. Another lady from Pakistan shared how she had worked on a local level, and now she works on an international level after working on a national level. Warda Malik from Pakistan. So all of these stories shows that we can learn from each other. We need to have agency and urgency in our climate action, and that we are all around the world, especially Muslim communities, facing climate change and proportionality. And for that, we need to have the implementation of polluters pay principle in order for the countries that have historically had their prosperous their prosperous life with all of these emissions to be held accountable for what they did, and at the same time, this allow us to go for a just transition to a resilient future. I know that I need to wrap up. I would like to mention lastly that last year we launched a report on the impact of climate change on 6 MENA countries: Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Lebanon, UAE, and Egypt. And it shows that people on the coastline are being affected. There is also a solution showed by a community in Egypt that they were depending on diesel, and they are fishermen, and now they are depending solely on solar energy. It's the Kal'an village. And here I would like to just end it by a few recommendations for MENA governments to draft and implement quality adaptation strategies and implementation plans that prioritize the most vulnerable communities, and this also was in the report. And in the pursuit of sustainable energy sovereignty, social justice, and resilience to climate impacts, draft and adhere to just transitional plans and alternative development pathways. And I would like to also share some recommendations for the global north. I'm ending by this. And for them, we ask them to adhere and expand upon past pledges. Yani, like now they have the loss and damage fund, and till now they didn't agree on the mechanism for the adaptation fund. So I'll ask like these pledges that are made for climate finance, for adaptation and mitigation, as well as knowledge and technology transfer, most important.
Nohad, thank you very much. This is amazing. Thank you so much. And what a better way to end. So, urgency for action. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nohad. This has been great. Thanks for our last panel. And thanks for our generous host. This has been a very engaging and wonderful one. We look forward to continue our partnership, really, and continue the endeavor that we have started on this narrative of integrating resilience into the just transition narrative. We'll be in touch. I'd like to thank you all. Apologies that we have run out of time, but the conversations have been really engaging. Encourage you all to reach out to each other for conversations. Also reach out to us to take this work forward. Thank you very much.